Wife discovers her husband's secret habits while doing his laundry. No one ever said marriage was a piece of cake. It requires a lot of work. But when Jonna Miller's husband David started coming home late, she decided to take a closer look at his laundry, and what she discovered made her rethink her views on marriage. After wondering if she'd ever find Mr. Right, Jonna Miller ran into David. Shortly after their first date in 2012, she sent her best friend a text gushing about finally meeting her future husband. She was right too, but then she realized her relationship wasn't the fairy tale she thought it was. A year later, they got engaged, and then Miller gave birth to a baby girl named Delaney in 2014. And in 2015, she walked down the aisle and tied the knot with her one and only. But things didn't go exactly as planned. Miller remembered how romantic it was when David proposed to her in front of 25 people during a Thanksgiving feast. It was one of the most memorable holidays of her life, and she had plenty to be grateful for. But all that changed in such a short time. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be. For starters, she didn't recall her mom reading anything about Snow White or Cinderella dealing with the prince's dirty laundry. But that wasn't the only thing that was bugging her. Miller was just a small-town girl from Indiana, but there was one thing that she had that wasn't small at all: her mouth. She was the kind of person who couldn't keep herself from saying how she felt. She had a wicked sense of humor and loved to instigate, but having a sense of humor wasn't the outlet she desperately needed. Something else was. Miller was dealing with the downsides of marriage, so she created a blog called The Blunt Blonde to vent. In it, she wrote, "I don't ever recall the prince in the fairy tale having rough, cracked hands and crow's feet before he turns 30. But those weren't the only warning signs. It's never good when a wife starts to resent her husband, but that's exactly how she felt. It was like she was raising her daughter all on her own, and she didn't like the situation one bit. Being a parent should be a shared experience, but he wasn't keeping up with his end of the bargain, and she was ready to burst. She knew that being a wife with a kid wasn't all candies and rainbows, but she didn't expect that it was going to be this complicated, especially given that her husband was MIA while she was stuck at home. She felt stuck, and it didn't help that her husband offered her very little comfort. I don't recall the prince missing dinners because he was working overtime or going to bed shortly after he came home to his palace because he was so exhausted," she added on her blog. Something wasn't right, but it wasn't until she went digging through his laundry that she got suspicious. She looked at the clothes on the bed and grabbed one of the shirts to study it closely. That's when the truth hit her like a speeding truck. Now she knew why her husband came home late all the time, and it left her shaken. Miller and her husband lived in Leesburg, Indiana. They hadn't been married very long, but everything was going great so far. But then he started coming home later than usual. Was it possible that he wasn't happy with his family anymore? Then, out of the blue, she found the answers she desperately needed. Miller wondered if she was to blame for not seeing the clues earlier. She was raised in Indiana and often joked that she spent a lot of time telling bad jokes and creating awkward situations. But it was her sarcastic nature that made her such a great blogger, and it was her followers she turned to when going got tough. Social media knows her as the Blunt Blonde, and her profile section on Twitter speaks volumes. People think I'm always joking, but I'm not. I'm genuinely an unpleasant person and hate everyone equally, she wrote on her About Me section, and her blog is just as snarky and sassy. On the About section of her blog, she mentions that English isn't her only language. If you haven't caught on, I'm fluent in English and sarcasm. But that's not the only eye-opening revelation her followers have to read. Some of her posts had a lot of people raising their eyebrows, and with good reason. "I'm currently a stay-at-home slave," she explains in the About section of her blog. She even calls her daughter her 3-foot-tall boss who loves to pile on the work. But in spite of her snarky, in-your-face type of humor, her followers weren't prepared for her to share what was really on her mind. Thousands of her readers tuned in to see what she would write about next. But one day, she decided to talk about her husband and what she'd learned about him, which left her followers utterly speechless. His childhood was quite different from Miller's lighthearted life. He was raised in an Amish community where distrust of technology and simple living was the staple of the Swiss-German religious order. But she didn't think this would ever be a deal-breaker. Was she wrong? Miller recalls one Amish habit she found a tad too eccentric, which she shared with her followers. "When I picked out ties for the guys to wear, my husband carefully notified me from a distance they can only wear bow ties. I stared. He said slowly, 'Amish people cannot wear ties.' I exploded. Despite their differences, her husband was adapting a lot better to his new life than she was. Her husband grew up in a Swiss-German Amish community that turned their backs on modern technology in exchange for a simpler life, which was the complete opposite of who Miller was. But he seemed willing to change for her, or so she assumed. Miller didn't know much about the Amish lifestyle until she met her husband. All I really knew about them was that they made donuts that would slap your taste buds with happiness you've never experienced before, she wrote on her blog. She also didn't know what kind of husbands Amish men made. She only wished she'd realized a lot of things sooner, but sadly that wasn't the case. She was often amused by her husband's idiosyncrasies. She even dedicated a whole section to him on her blog called "You Can Take a Man Out of the Amish, but…" She claimed that he was well adjusted to his new English lifestyle, but she was the one who wasn't adjusting to married life. Her husband worked grueling hours at an RV dealership, so he often didn't make it home until late in the evening. On the other hand, Miller was a stay-at-home mom who kept her online followers satiated. But on her blog, she claimed that her husband's absence made her conflicted and isolated. In 2015, she went on her blog after a rather difficult day and wrote, "Sometimes he'll come home after a long day at work and I'll be waiting for him to walk in the door so I can yell, 'You promised you'd be home at 5,' as if he'd rather be working than spending time with me and our daughter." But she didn't realize she was overreacting. "I know I'm putting him in a lose-lose situation," she wrote on her blog. "He literally can't win. If he doesn't work late, we won't get the new furniture set that I have to have. But if he does work later, he comes home to a nagging wife who's desperate for his attention." But while doing the laundry, it all became clear. She created 2 separate piles and folded the clothes she'd taken from the dryer. One belonged to her, the other belonged to her husband. "Why did my clothes look so vibrant, clean, and new? His were dingy, stained, and torn. I stopped folding and just stood there thinking," she wrote. And that's when it hit her. There was a reason she had to put his dinner in the fridge whenever he didn't come home by the time he had promised. It wasn't because he didn't want to spend time with her. It was because he was working hard in order to keep her happy. And that's when shame overcame her. The wave of guilt was life-altering. "This man provided me more than I deserve. If I tell him I want something, very seldom will he tell me no," she shared on her blog. She realized that her husband had been wearing old, worn-out clothes every day, while her clothes were new and expensive. But she had assumed the worst. "I get spoiled with the fruits of his labor, and he's okay with a pair of torn boxer briefs. I was acting as if he was out partying with his friends, but his laundry told me a completely different story," she wrote. But the thing that made her sad was the fact that he never complained. "His heart is full when he walks in through the door, and our daughter runs to him excitedly yelling, 'Dada!' And she realized she had to change." After Miller's epiphany, she promised herself that she would try to be a more equal partner. From now on, if she started to feel anger because he was late, she would remember that he was making sacrifices for his loved ones. So she encouraged her followers to think first before accusing their husbands of doing something wrong. It finally dawned on her husband was giving up the extra time he could have spent with his daughter, something she realized she was taking for granted. This became obvious to Miller every time she saw him with their daughter. The two loved being together. It was as if they were joined at the hip. He enjoyed every precious minute he had with his little girl because he knew there weren't many of those throughout the day. "Sure, I miss him and want to spend time with him throughout the week, but I've realized he's offering me the most beautiful form of love there is. He works to give our family everything we need. He works so his wife and daughter don't go without, even though there are times I'm sure he does," she shared. But she still had more important advice for her readers. Miller's random observation allowed her to admit that her resentment towards her husband was baseless. She also offered more great advice to her readers. If you have a hardworking man in your life and you can't comprehend how much he loves you, do his laundry. And this resonated with her readers. Miller's followers could relate to her blog post, but one follower was strongly affected by her. "This is an amazing reminder. I used to stay home with our daughters when they were little, and I used to feel horrible doing the same thing. This is an awesome perspective to carry," the woman wrote, according to Top 5. But the blog posts aren't always rantings on Miller's part. Real Blunt Blonde has tons of witty and hilarious posts about Miller's family, but a lot of her posts also talk about her husband's Amish roots and length. And these have been very popular with her followers as everyone's interest in the culture continues to peak. But she wants to set the record straight about one thing. "I'm not Amish, but my husband is one of her many blog posts that Miller wrote about her husband. In it, she talked about what happened the first time she met her husband's parents. She also clarified a lot of misconceptions that she too had about the Amish people. and she actually enjoys poking fun at her naivete using her wicked sense of humor. But she also provides great parenting tips. Miller also shares her experience on being a mom to Delaney. In 2016, she had to deal with her daughter's rebellious attitude during the Terrible Twos. She titled the post, "I graduated at the University of Toddlertown and majored in defeat." And while her clothes might not reflect how hard she works, it's obvious she's been through some ordeals of her own. Although Miller is pretty busy being a housewife and a parent, she always finds extra time to keep her blog up to date. She shares plenty of witty remarks and sarcastic points of views about being married with children with her followers every week. But she also likes to share all the fun things she does with her lovely daughter. Although being a mom can be exhausting, Miller certainly has a lot of fun with her daughter, especially on Halloween. Like the time she dressed her little girl up as a spider. But Halloween isn't her only favorite holiday. Christmas happens to be one of Miller's favorite holidays. And although her husband David is very busy working all the time, she can always count on him, or rather Santa, to come down and put a smile on her and her daughter's face. Despite his busy schedule, David took time off to take a trip to Disneyland with his family. That's where their daughter Delaney got to meet Cinderella herself. But soon the little girl realized she was no longer the only princess in her castle. In February 2019, Miller shared that she was pregnant with twins. Of course, that also meant that she wasn't going to get a break anytime soon, but she'd have plenty to write about on her blog. In September 2019, she gave birth to her twins, one of whom was a little girl they named Molly. She looked a lot like her big sister Delaney. The other twin was a sweet little boy they named Reese. It's safe to say that the Millers are going to have their hands full now that they have Molly and Reese. Between eating schedules and diaper changes, these parents are going to need a vacation pretty soon. Hopefully, their eldest daughter Delaney will lend a hand. But how does she feel about babysitting her younger siblings? Delaney is having a wonderful time with her new brother and sister, and there are no indications of sibling rivalry just yet. On a Facebook post, Miller wrote the following caption: "For those who have been following me for a while, well, you know Delaney, she's living her best life." Of course, no one expects Delaney to do everything for her parents or her siblings. She is just a little girl after all. So when one of her siblings gets fussy, she just hugs them and shrugs. Babies don't come with a manual, and it's clear that this babysitter's just winging it. But she's not the only one. Meanwhile, Miller and her husband are still trying to get the hang of things while adjusting to life with twins. This means double the feedings, double the baths, double the cries. For now, they're just riding it out and doing the best they can. Miller is also trying to recapture the romance with her husband on Valentine's Day. She joked on her Facebook page, Real Blunt Blonde, how she tries to flirt with her husband by posting a video of herself doing various house chores. Is there a bigger turn-on than a clean house? Exactly. On her Facebook page, Miller posted a video with the caption, "Let's not spread the coronavirus like it's Jif," and added a hashtag, "I'm not really freaking out," because she didn't think it made sense to lose her cool. As long as people take precautions, there's no risk to freak out just yet. In the video, she's rocking a pair of gloves and a mask to drive the message across. She's also posted videos on Real Blunt Blonde that talk about every subject that most moms go through, like her funny video called "Hanging Out with a New Mom." Not only does she poke fun at how she has to pretend like she's got it all together, but she also has to keep her cool when she wants to discipline her daughter in front of the new mom friend she's trying to impress. "Hanging out with a new mom is scarier than dating. Hashtag it's a fact," she wrote. Although Miller's LinkedIn account shows that she's been running the Blunt Blonde blog for nearly 4.5 years, the site itself appears to be down for the foreseeable future. But she'll undoubtedly keep her followers updated on her Instagram and Facebook.